The reception hall stretched out like a massive bubble of glass and metal, floating somewhere between the stars. Jake Morrison adjusted his collar for the third time in as many minutes, trying not to look as nervous as he felt. Around him, beings from across the galaxy mingled in small groups, their conversations creating a strange symphony of clicks, whistles, hums, and actual words in dozens of languages. He was not supposed to be here. Not really. Jake was just an assistant to the assistant of the human diplomatic team. His job usually involved carrying data tablets, ordering lunch, and making sure the conference rooms had enough chairs. But someone had gotten sick at the last minute, and suddenly Jake found himself holding a name badge that read Human Delegation Support Staff at the biggest diplomatic event of the decade. The Harmony Point Station hosted representatives from over 60 species today. This was the kind of gathering where real decisions got made, where treaties that would last for centuries were discussed over tiny glasses of beverages Jake could not even identify. He kept close to the wall, trying to stay out of the way while still looking like he belonged. A group of floating jellyfish-like creatures drifted past him, their translucent bodies glowing soft purple. Nearby, a being made entirely of what looked like living rock was deep in conversation with something that resembled a collection of golden branches, arranged in a vaguely humanoid shape. Jake had studied alien species for months before this assignment, but seeing them all in person was completely different from looking at pictures in training manuals. His supervisor, Linda Harris, caught his eye from across the room and gave him a small nod. She was talking with the actual important humans, the ones with fancy titles and years of experience. Jake felt a small wave of relief. As long as he stayed quiet and did not break anything, this night would eventually end, and he could go back to his normal, invisible duties. That was when everything changed. The conversations around him began to fade, starting from one side of the massive hall and spreading like a wave. Jake looked up to see what had caused the sudden quiet. A tall figure was moving through the crowd, and everywhere she went, beings stepped aside respectfully. She stood at least 7 feet tall, her body composed of what looked like thousands of tiny crystals all fitted together in the shape of a slender, elegant form. Light seemed to move through her in slow waves, creating shifting patterns of color across her surface. Her face, if it could be called that, had features that were almost human in arrangement, but clearly alien in execution. Large, multifaceted eyes caught and reflected the light like enormous diamonds. Jake had seen pictures of the Ashanti before. They were one of the older species in the galactic community, known for their philosophical traditions and their strange abilities to read emotions in other beings. This particular Ashanti wore what looked like official markings, bands of silver that wrapped around her shoulders and arms. The being stopped in the center of the hall. The room had gone almost completely silent now. Even the background music had been turned down by someone. Jake found himself holding his breath, though he had no idea why. The Ashanti woman turned slowly, her faceted eyes scanning the entire room. Jake could see the light refracting through her crystalline form, casting tiny rainbows on the floor around her feet. She seemed to be looking for something or someone. Her gaze swept past the human delegation, past Linda and the senior diplomats, past the cluster of military advisors in their dress uniforms, and then her eyes locked onto Jake. He felt it like a physical thing, that moment of connection. Her enormous, jewel-like eyes focused on him with absolute certainty. Jake's heart began to pound. He glanced to his left and right, hoping she was looking at someone near him, but there was empty space on both sides. The other guests had naturally spread out, creating small islands of conversation throughout the hall. The Ashanti raised one crystalline hand and pointed directly at him. "You," she said, and her voice came out in a sound like wind chimes mixed with distant bells. A small device on her chest translated her words into English a moment later. "You are the one I seek." Broken some protocol he did not know about? He had barely been at the station for 6 hours. How could he have possibly offended someone already? Linda Harris looked as confused as Jake felt. The senior human diplomats were exchanging quick glances, clearly trying to figure out what was happening. The Ashanti woman began walking toward him. The crowd parted smoothly, creating a clear path. Jake wanted to run. He wanted to disappear into the floor. Instead, he stood frozen as this powerful alien being approached him with obvious purpose. She stopped just a few feet away from him, towering over his average human height. Up close, Jake could see that her crystalline body was even more complex than he had thought. Thousands of tiny facets caught the light, and within her form, colors swirled and shifted like oil on water. "I am Ambassador Velkara of the Ashanti Empire," she said, her translation device rendering her musical voice into calm English. "I have been searching this gathering for the correct individual. You have been chosen to witness truth," she said. "It is an ancient tradition of my people. When negotiations of great importance must take place, we select one being whose heart light burns with absolute clarity, one who cannot hide their true nature, one who will see and remember honestly. I am not even a real diplomat." Jake caught sight of Linda's face. She looked stunned but also intensely curious. "I do not understand," Jake managed to say. Velkara gestured toward a doorway at the far end of the hall. "Come, we will speak privately. A treaty of great significance must be negotiated in the coming days. 3 species, 3 sacred territories, 3 different truths that must somehow align. And you, Jake Morrison, will be the eyes and ears that all sides can trust." Jake felt the weight of hundreds of alien eyes upon him, waiting to see what he would do. He thought about saying no, about explaining that there had been a mistake. But something in Velkara's manner, in the way her inner light pulsed with quiet certainty, made him pause. She was not threatening, she was not demanding, she was asking in her own way. And somehow impossibly, Jake heard himself say, "Okay, I will listen." Jake followed, his legs moving on autopilot, aware that his entire life had just changed direction because an alien woman had pointed at him across a crowded room. The private chamber was much smaller than the grand reception hall, but somehow more impressive. The walls seemed to be made of the same crystalline material as Velkara herself, glowing softly with an inner light that shifted through gentle blues and greens. Jake sat on what he hoped was a chair, though it had adjusted its shape to fit him in a way that was both comfortable and deeply strange. Velkara stood near a viewing window that looked out into space. Beside her was a smaller being, barely 4 feet tall, with smooth gray skin and large dark eyes. The creature wore simple robes and carried a data device that looked far more advanced than anything Jake had seen before. "This is Rith," Velkara said, gesturing to her companion. "My advisor and friend for many years. Rith does not speak your language, but understands more than most realize. I am not qualified for whatever you need. I have been working in the diplomatic corps for less than a year. Mostly, I just organize files and schedule meetings. Tell me, Jake Morrison, have you ever told a lie that someone believed completely? Or did you have to work hard to make them accept the untruth?" In school, when he tried to make excuses for being late, teachers always saw through him. Even as an adult, when he called in sick to work that one time when he just wanted a day off, his boss had asked if everything was really okay with a tone that suggested she knew the truth. "I guess I am not very good at lying," Jake admitted. "Exactly," Velkara said, and her inner light pulsed brighter. "My people, the Ashanti, see what others cannot. We perceive the bioluminescent patterns that all living beings produce. Emotions, intentions, truths, and deceptions all create different patterns. We call it heart light. Most had learned to control their heart light to some degree, diplomats especially. They have practiced hiding their true feelings, layering their intentions beneath acceptable surfaces. But you," she paused, "your heart light burns clear and steady. You feel nervousness, confusion, even fear right now, and all of it shows plainly. You could not hide it if you tried. So you chose me because I am bad at keeping secrets." A holographic display appeared, showing 3 different species. Jake recognized the Ashanti, of course. The second species looked like large insects, with multiple arms and shimmering wing cases. The third appeared to be aquatic beings, with smooth skin and features adapted for underwater life. "The Krell Collective and the Mari's Commonwealth," Velkara explained. 3 of our species share a region of space that contains sites of deep cultural and spiritual significance. For generations, we have managed this through informal agreements. But as our populations grow and technology advances, we need something more permanent. A treaty. Each species sent skilled diplomats, beings trained in the arts of negotiation and compromise. And each time, the talks collapsed because no one could trust that the others were being completely honest. The Krell suspected the Maris of hiding resource claims. The Maris accused us Ashanti of withholding information about sacred sites. We believed both of them were planning to exclude us from certain territories. Perhaps some of these suspicions were true, perhaps none were. But the mistrust poisoned everything. Someone whose emotional honesty is absolute. This being sits in the room and simply observes. They take notes, they listen. And because everyone knows this person cannot lie convincingly, their observations become trusted by all sides. But I told them I would find someone from a newer species, someone not connected to our old conflicts, someone whose innocence and honesty could not be questioned. Better qualified ones. Others in your delegation show ambition, calculation, personal agendas. Not bad things, but not what we need. Nervous, out of place. When you looked at the other species, your heart light showed pure curiosity, wonder, a little fear, yes, but also genuine interest. No judgment, no hidden goals, just an honest person trying to understand a new situation. He barely recognized himself in the footage, standing awkwardly by the wall. When I pointed at you, Velkara continued, your heart light flared with confusion and concern, not anger at being singled out, not excitement at potential opportunity, just honest bewilderment. And when you agreed to come with me, despite your fear, your heart light showed courage mixed with trust. You chose to believe I meant you no harm. These negotiations will determine the future of 3 civilizations and countless sacred places, sites where my people have meditated for thousands of years, breeding grounds that the Maris have protected since before they had space travel. Ancient hive structures that hold the genetic memory of the Krell. Not a trained diplomat who knows every trick of negotiation, just an honest observer who will see clearly and report truthfully. None of it had prepared him for this, but he also thought about what Velkara had said, about sacred places that needed protection, about species trying to find a way to share space peacefully, about how sometimes being ordinary and honest was exactly what extraordinary situations needed. What would I have to do? He asked. Velkara's inner light seemed to warm. Sit in the negotiation room, listen to everything said, take notes in your own words. When asked, tell all parties what you observed and understood. Nothing more, nothing less. Your outsider perspective might see things we miss. Through the contact, Jake felt a strange warmth, and for just a moment he thought he could see colors he had no names for dancing at the edge of his vision. Thank you, Jake Morrison, she said. You may have just saved 3 civilizations from decades of conflict. He just hoped his honesty would be enough. The negotiation chamber was designed to accommodate all 3 species comfortably. One section had water-filled seating for the Maris delegation. Another area featured elevated platforms with perfect temperature control for the Krell. The Ashanti section glowed with soft, crystalline formations that seemed to resonate with Velkara's own body. And in the corner, almost as an afterthought, sat a simple human-style chair and desk for Jake. He had been sitting in that chair for 3 days now, and his notebook was filling up quickly. The Maris representative was named Shoal Speaker Kenna. She breathed through both air and water using a specialized apparatus, her smooth blue-green skin glistening under the chamber lights. When she spoke, her voice came through a translation device as a gentle, flowing sound. She had kind eyes, Jake thought, but there was steel behind them. The Krell delegation was led by hive mind fragment Zixthar. The name had confused Jake at first, until Velkara explained that the Krell shared thoughts across their species, and Zixthar was a piece of their collective consciousness given individual form for these talks. The insectoid beings' wing cases would shimmer different colors depending on their mood, something Jake had started tracking in his notes. Ambassador Velkara represented the Ashanti, with Rith always nearby, quietly managing data and documents. And Jake sat in his corner, writing everything down in the simplest words he could manage. The northern crystal fields have been Ashanti meditation sites for 6,000 years, Velkara was saying, her translated voice calm but firm. We cannot agree to shared access without guarantees of silence and solitude. The Krell Collective requires access during the breeding migrations. The Maris Commonwealth has maintained those waters for generations. Any activity in the crystal fields affects the water quality below. Krell need to pass through during certain times. Maris need to protect the water. Nobody wants to hurt the others, but nobody wants to give up their connection to the place either. It was the same pattern he had been seeing for days. Each species had legitimate needs. Each had historical claims, and each was afraid that compromising would mean losing something precious. During the afternoon break, Kenna approached Jake's desk. Up close, her features were even more delicate than he had realized. Small frills along her neck fluttered gently as her apparatus cycled water and air. "You write very much," she said, her voice curious rather than critical. "May I ask what you find so important to record?" "Just trying to keep track of what everyone says, and sometimes what they seem to mean, even if they do not say it directly." "What do you think I mean when I speak of the water channels?" "I think you are worried that if the Ashanti meditate in the crystal fields and the Krell march through during migrations, all that activity might pollute or disturb the water. And that water is not just important to you culturally. Your people actually need it to survive. So it is not just about tradition, it is about life itself. We do not say this loudly because we do not wish to seem like we are claiming our needs are more important. But you understand." "The Mari spoke with you," Zixthar observed. "She seemed pleased. What did you discuss?" "I told her what I thought she meant about the water channels. I think the migrations are not just tradition either. I think your species has biological programming to follow those exact routes, and if you cannot use them, it might actually hurt your ability to reproduce. But you do not want to say that directly because it sounds like a threat, like you are saying your biological needs should override everyone else's spiritual needs." "The human sees what we do not say," Zixthar said finally. "This is useful, also uncomfortable." But during breaks, when they thought no one was paying attention, he saw small moments of genuine connection. He saw Velkara admiring the craftsmanship of a data device that Kenna carried, asking questions about Mari's artistic traditions. He saw Zixthar sharing images of the Krell breeding grounds with obvious pride, and Velkara responding with what seemed like real appreciation. He saw Kenna watching Rith organize documents and commenting on how efficient the system was. Jake wrote it all down. They actually like each other. When they are not negotiating, they seem interested in each other's cultures. They ask real questions. They listen to the answers. The problem is not that they are enemies. The problem is that they are all so afraid of losing what matters to them that they cannot find a way to share. On the 5th day, the negotiations hit a wall. "We cannot accept the current proposal," Velkara said, her light dimming slightly. "The meditation schedules overlap too heavily with the migration periods. Our people need absolute stillness. We do not choose when to spawn. We cannot compromise on timing as well. What is your honest assessment of these negotiations?" He stood up, his notebook in hand, feeling more nervous than he had ever felt in his life. "I think," he said slowly, "that you are all trying to solve the wrong problem." Velkara's light pulsed with what might have been surprise. Jake continued, his voice shaking slightly but his words clear. "You are all negotiating like you are enemies fighting over territory, but from what I have seen, you are not enemies at all. You are 3 different species who all love the same place for different reasons. And you are so afraid of losing your connection to that place that you cannot see the obvious answer. On Earth, we have places that are sacred to multiple religions, cities where different faiths have worshipped for thousands of years. Sometimes it works, sometimes it does not. But when it works, it is because people stop thinking about dividing the space and start thinking about protecting it together. All 3 of you working together." Kenna's frills slowly lifted again, fluttering with what looked like cautious hope. "Tell us more," Velkara said softly, "about these shared sacred places on Earth." And Jake, an ordinary assistant who had never expected to be in this room, began to talk about Jerusalem and Mecca, about temples and churches that had stood for centuries, about how humans had learned slowly and imperfectly to share what they held holy. The 3 species listened, and something in the room began to change. The emergency session began just after midnight station time. Jake had been asleep in his quarters when Rith had knocked on his door, gesturing urgently for him to follow. Now he sat at his desk in the negotiation chamber, trying to shake off the fog of exhaustion while the 3 species assembled. Velkara's crystalline form seemed brighter in the dimmed lighting, pulsing with an energy that suggested she had not slept at all. Kenna moved through her water-filled section with quick, anxious movements. Zixthar's wings kept shifting between deep purple and bright yellow, Colors Jake had learned meant the Krell Collective was experiencing intense debate within itself. We have spent the evening in separate consultations with our governments, Velkara began. Your words this afternoon, Jake Morrison, sparked something, a different way of thinking about our situation. But now we must see if this new approach can actually work. The crystal fields glowed in the center, with underground water channels snaking beneath them and migration corridors passing through them. We propose something that has never been attempted between our three species, Velkara continued. A joint stewardship. Not divided territory, but shared responsibility. Who makes decisions about the crystal fields? Who enforces protections? But sharing authority with other species, with different ways of thinking, different biological needs. This is unprecedented. On Earth, when we share sacred places, there are usually guardians, people whose job is to protect the site itself, not to represent any one group's interests. Is that something that could work here? Explain more. Their job would be to make sure the fields stay healthy and protected, and that all three of your peoples can use them according to your needs. But you already trust each other more than you think. I have watched you for 5 days now. Every time you talk about the crystal fields, all three of you use the same kind of language. You call them sacred. You talk about protecting them for future generations. You worry about damage and pollution. You are not really in conflict about what you want. You all want the same thing, to keep the crystal fields safe and accessible. The Krell Collective has analyzed the negotiation transcripts. When we remove the competitive framing, our core goals align in 73.6% of areas. Jake set down his pen. Because you are scared, and I do not mean that as an insult. I mean it as an observation. You are all afraid that if you share control, you will lose something precious. The Ashanti are afraid that noise and activity will destroy the meditation spaces. The Krell are afraid that restrictions will block the migration routes and hurt your species' survival. The Maris are afraid that carelessness will poison the waters that feed your spawning pools. But you are letting fear make you treat each other like threats instead of like partners. Her crystalline hand touched the holographic display and the image changed. Instead of showing territorial divisions, it now showed the crystal fields as a whole with different colored pathways winding through them. The Ashanti propose this, she said quietly. 3 guardian positions, one from each species. They would live in the crystal fields for rotating periods, learning the land intimately. Their responsibility would be to the fields first, to their own species second. The Maris would want one of these guardians to have expertise in water systems, to monitor the underground channels and ensure purity, to ensure the corridors remain viable for our spawning needs. So each guardian brings their own expertise, but they work together. They are not competing. They are each protecting a different aspect of the same place. Rules for how decisions get made when the guardians disagree. Fresh perspectives every few years. Not arguing, but adding. Each suggestion sparked another like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. He wrote furiously, "This is what cooperation looks like. They are not agreeing on everything, but they are creating something together. Something none of them could make alone." For the next 3 hours, the 3 species worked through details. They discussed how guardians would be selected, how long their terms would last, what authority they would have. They debated sanctuary schedules and emergency protocols. They argued about monitoring systems and communication methods, but it was different from the arguments of the previous days. Now they were arguing about how to make something work, not about why it could not work. Jake noticed other things too, small gestures of respect. Velkara pausing to make sure Kenna's translation device was working properly. Zixthar adjusting the temperature in their section after noticing Rith seemed uncomfortable. Kenna offering to share water purification data that might help the Ashanti understand the underground systems better. When dawn began to brighten the viewport, they had the framework of an actual agreement. This would be a living document, Velkara said, her light warm and steady. Something we adjust and improve as we learn. We cannot predict every situation. The Krell Collective finds this approach acceptable, Zixthar said. More than acceptable, the hive mind is experiencing something unusual. Hope we believe your language would call it. What do your notes tell you about what we have created here? 5 days ago, you were 3 separate species trying to divide up territory. Now you are 3 partners trying to protect something you all love. That is a completely different thing. Not blind trust, but trust with structure. Trust with accountability. Trust that says we will work together because what we are protecting is bigger than any of our individual needs. I think it has a real chance, better than anything else you have tried, but it will require all three of you to keep choosing partnership over competition, every single day. The human heart reader speaks wisdom beyond his years. The Krell Collective is satisfied with these negotiations. But I believe we have found our path forward. Just frightened friends who had forgotten how to trust each other. And he had been privileged to witness it. The treaty signing ceremony was held in the main assembly hall of Harmony Point, the same place where Velkara had first pointed at Jake across a crowded room. But everything felt different now. The space was filled with representatives from dozens of species, all gathered to witness what many were calling a historic moment in galactic diplomacy. Jake stood off to the side in a new formal suit that the human delegation had rushed to get him. He still felt out of place among all the dignitaries and officials, but less so than before. The past week had changed something fundamental in how he saw himself. The signing platform held 3 podiums arranged in a triangle. Velkara stood at one, her crystalline form catching the light and scattering rainbows across the assembled crowd. Kenna occupied another, her water apparatus gleaming and perfectly maintained for this formal occasion. Zixthar stood at the third, wings held in a position that Rith had explained meant ceremonial dignity in Krell culture. The treaty document itself was a work of art. It had been translated into the written forms of all 3 languages, with the Ashanti version etched in crystal, the Mari's version flowing in liquid light, and the Krell version encoded in a pattern of colors. A human version existed too, printed on simple paper, included because Jake had been the witness. Ambassador Chen, the head of the human delegation, stepped forward to introduce the ceremony. Jake had met with her that morning, enduring an hour of questions about exactly what had happened in those negotiation sessions. She had seemed both proud and slightly bewildered that her lowest-ranking assistant had played such a central role. "We gather today," Chen said, her voice carrying through the translation systems, "to witness the signing of the Crystal Fields Preservation Treaty. This agreement represents not just a solution to territorial disputes, but a new model for interspecies cooperation. The Ashanti Empire, the Krell Collective, and the Mari's Commonwealth have chosen partnership over division. They have created the first Tri-Species Stewardship Council in this sector of the galaxy." Chen continued, "But before the signing, we recognize the individual whose honest observations helped make this treaty possible. Jake Morrison, please step forward." He caught Velkara's eye, and her inner light pulsed with what he had learned to read as gentle amusement. She had known about this. He walked to the platform on shaking legs, aware of hundreds of alien eyes watching him. Velkara spoke first. "In Ashanti tradition, the heart reader is more than an observer. They become part of the memory of the negotiation itself. Their name is recorded in our historical archives, connected forever to the agreement they witnessed." Light moved through it in slow, hypnotic patterns. "This is called a memory stone," Velkara explained. "It has been attuned to your heart light, Jake Morrison. It will glow in your presence, carrying the pattern of your honest nature. Keep it as a reminder that truth and sincerity are powers greater than deception and manipulation." Kenna approached next, moving gracefully despite her apparatus. She held a small vial of water that seemed to shimmer with its own inner glow. "From the sacred spawning pools of the Mari's Commonwealth," she said softly. "Water that has flowed beneath the crystal fields for 10,000 years. We give this to you as a symbol of how separate things can be connected beneath the surface. You helped us see those hidden connections between our 3 peoples. The water will never evaporate or spoil. It will remain pure, as we hope our partnership will remain pure. The Krell Collective does not often give gifts to individual beings," Zixthar said. "Our nature is to think collectively, to value the group over the one, but you have shown us that sometimes one honest voice can change the thoughts of many. This crystal contains a fragment of our hive mind's memory of these negotiations. Whenever you access it, you will experience what the collective experienced: our fears, our hopes, our decision to trust." The 3 gifts felt impossibly precious, far beyond anything he deserved. "I just wrote down what I saw," he managed to say. "I was just trying to be honest." And that simple act of honesty changed everything. The translations echoed through the hall, creating a chorus of promise and hope. When it was complete, when the treaty was officially sealed, the entire assembly erupted in celebration. Species that had never interacted before began introducing themselves to each other, inspired by what they had witnessed. Jake found himself surrounded by curious beings asking questions about the negotiations. How had he known what to say? What made him think of shared stewardship? Did humans have special training for this kind of observation? He answered as honestly as he could. No special training, no secret knowledge. Just paying attention and trying to understand what people really meant beneath what they were saying. Later, as the celebration continued, Jake found a quiet corner where he could catch his breath. He held Velkara's memory stone up to the light, watching the patterns shift inside it. "Quite a week for an assistant who organizes files," a voice said behind him. He turned to find Ambassador Chen standing there with a slight smile. "Yes, ma'am," Jake said. "I still cannot quite believe it happened." "What?" "I was just being myself. But your career just changed direction rather dramatically." The Krell data crystal holding the thoughts of a collective mind. A week ago, he had been invisible, a background person doing background work. Now his name would be in galactic archives. The Morrison Protocol, it felt surreal. His communication device buzzed. A message from Velkara. "The first Guardian Council meeting is in 2 months. The 3 species would be honored if you would attend as an observer to ensure we are staying true to the spirit of our agreement. Will you come, friend across the stars?" At Velkara, Kenna and Zixthar standing together, no longer separated by podiums but gathered in a small circle, clearly enjoying each other's company. He thought about his small apartment on Earth, his simple life before all this. Part of him missed that simplicity. But another part, a growing part, understood that he had found something here. Not just a career or an opportunity, but a purpose. Being honest in a universe full of complex politics and hidden agendas was not just useful, it was essential. And somehow, impossibly, that simple truth had been proven by an ordinary human who had just tried his best to see clearly and speak truthfully. Jake Morrison, heart reader, witness to history, friend across the stars. He tucked the 3 gifts carefully into his jacket pocket, right above his heart, and went to join the celebration. The universe was bigger than he had ever imagined, and he was ready to explore it with honesty as his only compass.